On April 4th, 2024, Maxwell Anderson sat in the driver's seat of his car, squinting against the flashing lights of a Milwaukee police cruiser. To any onlooker, he looked like a man mildly inconvenienced by a traffic stop. He was 33 years old, a former Navy man, a local bartender known for his charisma, and a man who stood a commanding 6'1". He was calm. He was compliant. He was even a little bit arrogant. As the officer approached his window, Maxwell didn't flinch. He didn't realize that 48 hours earlier, a 19-year-old college student named Sade Robinson had vanished into the night after their very first date. More importantly, he didn't realize that while he was playing the role of the concerned citizen, investigators were already looking at a piece of evidence so small and so specific it would destroy his perfect alibi before he even had a chance to finish his first lie. Sade Robinson was a 19-year-old student at Milwaukee Area Technical College. To those who knew her, she was a firecracker, a young woman full of life, ambition, and a fierce sense of independence. She had her whole life mapped out, and on the evening of April 1st, 2024, she was excited. She had a first date scheduled with a man she had recently met, someone who seemed charming and established. That man was Maxwell Anderson. They met for dinner at a local spot called the Twisted Fisherman. It was a typical Monday night in Milwaukee. The air was crisp, and the restaurant was filled with the low hum of conversation. Security footage from the establishment captured the pair sitting together. On camera, it looked like any other first date. They talked, they laughed, and they shared a meal. There were no outward signs of distress, no red flags that the staff noticed, and certainly no indication that Sade was in any danger. At approximately 9 p.m., the footage shows them walking out of the restaurant together. To any casual observer, the night was a success, but by Tuesday morning, the silence from Sade's side was deafening. Her phone, which was usually an extension of her hand, went dark. She didn't show up for her classes. She didn't check in with her mother. For a girl like Sade, this wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. While her family began the frantic process of calling hospitals and friends, a different kind of call was coming in to the Milwaukee Fire Department. At 7:30 a.m. on Tuesday, April 2nd, emergency crews were dispatched to an abandoned lot on the city's north side. A vehicle was fully engulfed in flames. By the time the fire was extinguished, the car was nothing more than a blackened skeletal frame. It was a 2020 Honda Civic. It belonged to Sade Robinson. The killer had been thorough. The interior was gutted by the heat. The license plates were gone. The personal belongings were ash. The perpetrator clearly believed that the fire would act as a universal eraser, turning every shred of DNA, every fingerprint, and every clue into gray dust. They were wrong. When investigators arrived at the scene of the burnt-out car, they began a methodical search of the surrounding area. This wasn't just a stolen car ditched by joyriders. The placement of the vehicle and the intensity of the accelerant suggested a desperate attempt to hide a much darker secret. Enter Maxwell Anderson. As a 33-year-old former Navy veteran and a well-known bartender at several popular Milwaukee haunts, Maxwell was a man who understood how to navigate social spaces. When detectives first contacted him, he didn't run, he didn't hide. He agreed to sit down for an interview. In the interrogation room, the power dynamic was fascinating. Maxwell sat with his back straight, his legs crossed comfortably. He looked the detectives in the eye. He admitted that he and Sade had gone out. He claimed they had a great time. But his story ended with a shrug. He told the police he dropped her off at her home and simply never saw her again. If you watch the footage of this initial encounter, pay close attention to his hands. Throughout the questioning, Maxwell began picking at his nails and smoothing his clothing. In the world of criminal psychology, these are known as grooming gestures. They are self-soothing behaviors used by suspects who are under immense internal stress, but are trying to project an image of calm. He was trying to maintain a mask of the helpful date, but the mask was beginning to crack under the weight of the facts he didn't know the police already had. Detective Jo Donner was one of the lead investigators on the case, and she had a hunch that would change everything. She returned to the charred remains of the Honda Civic. The fire had been so hot that it had melted the dashboard, but it had also frozen certain mechanical components in place, specifically the driver's seat. This is where the killer's arrogance became his undoing. Sade Robinson was barely 5 feet tall. Maxwell Anderson was 6'1". When the forensic team examined the seat tracks of the burnt-out car, they found that the driver's seat was pushed all the way back to its furthest setting. The detectives performed a reconstruction. They brought in a female deputy who was the exact height and build of Sade Robinson. They sat her in that seat. Her feet couldn't even reach the pedals. Her arms were locked straight out, unable to grip the steering wheel with any leverage. It was a physical impossibility for Sade Robinson to have been the last person to drive her car to that abandoned lot. The seat was adjusted for someone with a much larger frame, someone with long legs, someone exactly like Maxwell Anderson. While the seat defense was being built, a more grisly reality was unfolding along the shores of Lake Michigan. On April 5th, a passerby at Warnemont Park in Cudahy discovered a human leg that washed up on the beach. It had been severed at the hip. DNA testing confirmed the nightmare. It belonged to Sade Robinson. The investigation shifted from a missing person case to a homicide of unimaginable brutality. Maxwell Anderson wasn't just a killer, he was a predator who had attempted to systematically deconstruct his victim to prevent her discovery. But he underestimated the power of modern forensics and the sheer geography of his own movements. Search warrants were executed at Anderson's home. Inside, they found blood in the stairway leading to the basement. They found a series of saws, but the most damning evidence was digital. In 2024, it is nearly impossible to move through a major city without being recorded. Detectives tracked Maxwell's pings and compared them to citywide surveillance footage. They saw his car. They saw her car. They tracked the two vehicles moving in tandem towards the park where the remains were found. They saw the flash of the fire in the distance on a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera at the exact time Maxwell's phone placed him in that lot. Back in the interrogation room, the atmosphere changed. The detectives were no longer asking for help. They were presenting a timeline. They showed him the maps. They showed him the photos of the car seat. This is what we call the realization moment. If you look at the footage, there is a distinct point where Maxwell stops talking, the fidgeting stops, the arrogance is replaced by a cold, hard stare. He realizes that he hasn't outsmarted anyone. He realizes that the mechanical settings of a burnt chair, a detail he never even thought about, had effectively placed his hands on the wheel of a dead girl's car. The disgusting secret hidden in his basement was laid bare for the world to see. Over the following weeks, more remains were found, a foot, a torso. Each piece of evidence was a testament to a night of violence that stood in stark contrast to the nice guy image Maxwell had cultivated at the bars where he worked. The trial of Maxwell Anderson in June 2025 was one of the most emotional in Milwaukee's history. The prosecution didn't need to speculate on his motives. They simply let the evidence speak. They presented the impossible seat position. They presented the GPS pings that acted as a breadcrumb trail to the dump sites. They presented the chilling security footage of Sade's final moments, where she looked happy, unaware that the man walking beside her was her executioner. Sade's mother, Sheena Scarborough, stood in court and spoke of the hole left in her life, a hole created by a man who thought his Navy training and his local popularity made him untouchable. The jury didn't take long. They saw through the charming bartender act in less than 4 hours of deliberation. Maxwell Anderson was found guilty on all counts: first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and arson. As of early 2026, Maxwell Anderson sits in a cell at the Dodge Correctional Institution. He is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He continues to file appeals, claiming he was the victim of a rush to judgment and that the evidence was circumstantial. But the facts remain unchanged. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought a gallon of gasoline and a match could erase a human life, but he forgot that every action leaves a trace. He forgot that a car seat doesn't lie. And most importantly, he forgot that the truth has a way of washing up on the shore, no matter how deep you try to bury it. Sade Robinson was a daughter, a student, and a friend. Her life was cut short by a man who mistook his own narcissism for brilliance. But in the end, it wasn't a grand forensic breakthrough that caught him. It was a simple mechanical adjustment. A tall man in a short woman's car.